It's Chelsa Messenger with Picks and Parlays. The NFL is finally back. It feels really good to say that. We've got a nice little promo code for 20% off the entire site at picksandparlays.net. The code is NFL20. We're heading to the AFC East for this matchup in particular. We're talking Dolphins and Patriots. The total is 43. New England favoring this one -6.5. Of course, they've got Cam Newton as their starting quarterback. The Dolphins just named Ryan Fitzpatrick as their starter. We've got Scott Rickenbach joining us to talk this AFC East matchup, which should be an interesting one, which all football is going to be interesting in the first week, especially with OTAs being shortened. All these training camps have been abbreviated, so it should be an interesting start to the season. So, Scott, what's your take on this game? Is this number too big for the Patriots to cover, or are you looking at a total?
Well, I am looking at the number on this one rather than the total. And interesting point that you brought up right off the bat is that number being at 6.5. And in my experience with NFL betting through the years, when I see a number like this, the first thing it makes me think is it's an open invitation to take the Patriots and lay less than a touchdown. And in NFL betting, you don't like to do what looks like an open invitation. So I'm going to be leaning toward the Miami Dolphins in this matchup, but it's not without reason. When people look at Miami, they look at a team that, okay, they finished last season 5-11, but they started the season 0-7. They won 5 of their last 9 games. They had a good draft, and also they did well in free agency on both sides of the ball. So I'm not getting overly excited here and saying that Miami's going to be a great team this year, but what I'm saying is that I think there is some value with them as an underdog in this matchup. Keep in mind, we're talking about a Patriots team that no longer has Brady. And not only that, that's the big story you hear about, but on the defensive side of the ball, they lost a couple of players that went to play with their former defensive coordinator, who's now the head coach of the Detroit Lions. So they're a little bit weaker on each side of the ball, in my opinion, and yet they're still commanding respect because, of course, this game is at Foxborough. Also, you're probably going to hear people talking about the fact that it's a revenge game for the Patriots because Miami beat them in the last game of the season. But trust me, when the Patriots think back to last season, all they remember is that they lost in the first round of the playoffs. So, and again, this is not the same Patriots team. I still respect, of course, Coach Belichick, and I respect the Patriots as a whole, but I still think this number is a little funny to me. And one other comment I want to make that I like to look at when entering an NFL season, and of course, some of this is coaching and the level of personnel that you have on your team, but the Patriots were plus 21 in turnovers last year, while the Dolphins were -9. Now, if you figure that out and combine those two factors, it's kind of an average of Patriots having a benefit of a couple turnovers a game compared to the Dolphins. That kind of stuff has a tendency to even out over the long run. And so again, in a case like this, I'm looking to grab the points with the underdog in this one and go with the Miami Dolphins.
Right. It should be interesting just in general to see some of these teams start the season without any preseason games. I think that's probably why we see Ryan Fitzpatrick starting for the Dolphins, because he does provide a little bit of continuity for this Dolphins team that is young. Obviously, last year wasn't, the greatest, but they did beat the Patriots, their final game of the year. You
Yes.
mentioned it as a revenge game, but here's why I wouldn't like the Patriots in this one. They had 8 players opt out this season. That's the most of any team in the entire NFL. And 2 of those players, veteran presences on their defense, Dante Hightower, and Patrick Chung, which are 2 guys that, from a leadership standpoint, they'll be losing a lot. So I kind of like the over in this one because 2 of these quarterbacks, both kind of wild cards in the fact that Ryan Fitzpatrick, he can have a great game. He can be Ryan Fitzmagic, or it can be Ryan Fitztragic. Either way, I
Yes.
kind of like it for the points because he's either going to throw for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns, or he's going to throw several interceptions. He threw 13 picks last season. So I just like the combination of the Patriots losing some veteran presences on defense and the fact that, oh yeah, Cam Newton, he can be like a Band-Aid for this Patriots offense if he decides that he can run the football again. So, yeah, I like an over in this one.
Yes, and good points about both quarterbacks. That's the thing. Fitzpatrick can come up big in a game like this, and at the same time, Cam Newton's going to want to put on a show in his first game.
Hmm.
They're at home. Patriots certainly won't hold back on offense if they get the opportunity to put a bunch of points on the board. And it should be quite a highly competitive game. We could see some back and forth here. I wouldn't argue at all with you about that over, that's for sure.
Right, and 43 is not super high for a total. I think a lot of these totals have looked quite similar, with the exception of the Chiefs and the Texans, some of those games. But 43 is a nice number, I think, if you're betting an over.
Yes, and one of the keys I just want to mention, that not just for this game, but for all games in football, always be sure to check the weather before you make a totals play, of course.
Hmm.
And if you're looking at the over, just watch out for that wind. Of course, in the early fall, it's the time when the seasons are changing a little bit, especially up in the Boston area. So you just want to check that to be sure you don't have some bad wind conditions. But if you don't, and the weather's pretty clear, you know that it's going to be fully open for your passing game to function at 100%. So
Right, or maybe we'd see Cam Newton run the ball a little bit more, which, if you can't tell, I'm anxious for him to get back to the old Cam Newton, because in Carolina, we saw him, it would be first and goal, from the one, and he wouldn't be the one running it in. So I'm anxious to see a healthy Cam Newton who isn't afraid to run the ball, and that's what I'm hoping to see.
yes, and ultra dangerous when he's like that for sure.
All right, well, that's going to do it for Dolphins and Patriots talk here on Picks and Parlays. As always, great stuff from Scott Rickenbach. Scott, thanks for joining us.